is a turning point in the franchise, and it asks several difficult questions regarding the definition and foundation of the series as a whole. What is Fallout? Is it a campaign setting for a pen-and-paper influenced role-playing experience, or is it, more than anything, a distinctive audio-visual brand? Is it the iconography and the mood that matters most, or is it the details of the world building and the tone of the writing? The series has always had a fascinating back and forth between these values, characterized most strongly by Bethesda's Fallout 3 versus the Obsidian-developed Fallout New Vegas. Yet, Fallout 4 is a remarkable collision between the freewheeling, mood-oriented Fallout 3 and the more naturalistic map design of New Vegas, along with its faction-focused plot development. But Fallout 4 is the first Fallout game where you could not guess that it was once based on tabletop RPGs if you didn't already know. Fallout 4 is a heavily streamlined action RPG. It is a piece of software first, and a role-playing game second. While faction choice plays heavily into the outcome of the endgame, player choice has never mattered less in a Fallout game, maybe excepting tactics. In terms of the scope of the wasteland, it is both incredibly ambitious and vivid in how it constructs its urban areas, and disappointingly compact when it comes to the rest of the wasteland. Fallout 4 has one of the best main plots of any Bethesda game, and some of the worst side questing. It is a massive accomplishment in visual world building, and a severely disjointed, unevenly paced misfire in the narrative world building department. The dialogue is consistently better than everything in Fallout 3, especially in terms of delivery and timing, but the conversation system itself is a reductive, buggy disaster. I loved this game. I really did. For its visual aesthetic, yet it disappointed me as a longtime series fan. So many of this game's accomplishments in one element of its design are subverted by awkwardness in other elements. It makes you wonder where the franchise is going, because the game truly does go in many new and unprecedented directions. The value of those directions are going to be highly subjective depending on what Fallout means to you as a franchise, what elements of Fallout's iconography and design history define the experience for you. For me, Fallout 1 and 2 were the games that set the tone. Fallout 4 continues the traditions of those games in some ways, in the general mood and in the visual aesthetic, but casts aside many of the role-playing features that made those early RPGs so beloved. These days, though, it isn't the world building that's so exciting about Fallout. It's the world they've already built and already defined and already put on all the advertising material. Fallout is such a vivid setting because it's got one foot in the real world, the late 40s to early 60s civil defense era of the Cold War. It uses the optimistic consumerism of post-war pop culture and juxtaposes it with the brutal radiation-soaked Armageddon that was an actual day-in, day-out possibility for the entire duration of the Cold War. Fallout 4 taps into this more directly than any previous entry in the franchise. You actually begin the game before the war begins. You experience a brief moment of atomic family domesticity, and then the missiles are on their way. In a genuinely fantastic moment, you witness the bombs go off as an elevator slowly brings you down to a vault to be shielded from the shockwave, the radiation, and the inferno. Then, immediately, and without discussion, you're cryogenically frozen for a couple hundred years. You are, as the papers will call you, a man out of time, or a woman out of time. This is a good setup, but it's hampered by being too brief, maybe half the time it takes to get out of Vault 101 in Fallout 3. You sign up for the vault minutes before the bombs fall, and everything in the intro is done like a brief, colorful sketch. There's no time to live in the old world before it's gone. We're supposed to relate to this world because it's familiar, but in previous Fallouts, the gone-away world is mostly defined by how foreign and ridiculous it seems in relation to the world as it is. Nostalgically speaking, Fallout 4 tries to have its cake and eat it too, which causes all kinds of problems. In Fallout 1 and 3, there is only the vault to start with. Everything else is unfamiliar and alien, both the pre-war world and the one that sprang from its corpse. In Fallout 2 and New Vegas, you are a tangential part of the new world already. A tribesman, a courier, fringe figures. Their socialization into the world was the player's socialization as well. While the player character in Fallout 4 is an outsider in the new world, they're an insider of the old, and things about the pre-war world that earlier games might have constructed as absurd, this game constructs as lost wonders. Fallout 4 also has, for the first time in a Bethesda game, a voiced player character. Either the war vet father or the collegiate mother of a new family, who the game goes to great lengths to paint as loving and normal in a very 50s kind of way. While it's cool to see the retro-future iconography of the Fallout universe in its golden prime, the giant nuclear-powered cars, the wood-paneled electronics, the casual formality of the era's fashions, the problem is that Fallout 4 is trying to play this nostalgia straight. In previous games, that nostalgia is not so much for the pre-war world as it was, but as it never was. The very first Fallout's intro features American troops executing Canadian citizens in the streets with a patriotic rag playing in the background. The violence that consumed the world of Fallout was always there, just under the surface, not just with nefarious corporations like Vault-Tec, but with the whole system of Golden Age consumption. They consumed until nothing was left, and then reduced that nothing to ashes. The furniture, the fashions, the whole retro future, the iconography is so punchy and so memorable because the dreamy, optimistic nostalgia is poisonously false. This post-nuclear future is the inevitable outcome wrought by the hunger of the Golden Age past. The conflicts of the franchise are forward-thinking conflicts. What civilizations will sprout in the radioactive soil, and what effect can one player have on their intertwining destinies? Fallout 4 is much more backward-looking, mired in nostalgia for the wrong things. It's mired not only in its thematic nostalgia for the pre-war world, but also in its nostalgia for Fallout 3. Fallout 4 feels like an alternate take on Fallout 3 more than a full-fledged sequel much of the time. It uses the same mix of iconic, recognizable brand elements like Super Mutants and the Brotherhood of Steel, and the same distribution of massive urban sprawl with larger expanses of rural wasteland. It's a much tidier, more compact wasteland, though. And that's a lot of the problem. For all its technical oddities, Fallout 4's wasteland is much more carefully and deliberately arranged than Fallout 3 or New Vegas. It's got regions that are more distinct than the large brown tracts of previous games, like the swamps down south towards Quincy or the glowing sea in the map's southwestern extremes. And this is despite having an overall smaller wasteland. Like Fallout 3, a massive urban sprawl dominates the map. But unlike 3's rendition of Washington, D.C., Boston, Cambridge, and many of the buildings therein, including skyscrapers, are fully integrated with a primary map, and you can transition in real time with no loading from the outer wilderness to the dense skyscrapers of the financial district. Gone are the warrens of subway tunnels and interlocking neighborhood maps, and there is an amazing freedom in shedding those dozens of level transitions you'd go through chasing down objective markers in Fallout 3. Boston in Fallout 4 is one of Bethesda's most genuinely impressive technical accomplishments, totally unlike anything they've put in a game so far, more ambitious, and with a compulsively playable execution. The rhythm of urban exploration is so much better than ever before. Accomplishing quest goals is difficult because every block has explorable building after explorable building where, if you can't go inside it, you can probably at least climb on top of it. Even better, Fallout 4 takes more after New Vegas than Fallout 3 in terms of interior map design, with realistically proportioned dimensions that seem to conform to the exterior of the building. None of the labyrinthine multi-map dungeons of Fallout 3 or the Elder Scrolls games. There are some exceptions, but only for buildings that are genuinely massive. So you generally know what to expect from a time investment perspective, and you can navigate towards it through the main game map without interruption. This sounds simple, but it's a revolutionary quality of life improvement in terms of player experience and momentum in the map. The Commonwealth really feels like radiation-blasted western Massachusetts in miniature. Too miniature, ultimately. Skyrim was, and is, one of the all-time great landscapes in gaming. Each hold was so environmentally distinct, and many side quests of each major city had a particular regional flavor. Fallout 3 broke the Elder Scrolls mold that you might see in Oblivion by scattering its side quests all over the wasteland, not just keeping them within the cities, and halved the number of cities and settlements that you might find in an Elder Scrolls title. Fallout 4 combines the two approaches, but not as well as you might hope. Although Boston is a technical wonder, it relies heavily on radiant quests, repeatable randomized quests that combine a nearby undiscovered or uncleared map marker with an enemy type suitable to your level. Settlements sometimes have written quests with actual stories, but the bulk of questing in Fallout 4 is this procedurally generated radiant questing, and managing those radiant quest-generating settlements is its own extensive minigame on top of it. Fallout 4's game world is not arranged like the old Fallouts, not like a tabletop campaign, but arranged instead as a post-apocalyptic simulation with settlements that can be expressed with numbers and statistics which produce XP bonuses and new map markers in the form of quests to make exploration more of an economic system than an expression of curiosity. It is fitting that this is a game about artificial men. The Institute is not the only one creating them. Synth or not, every last character in Fallout 4 eventually reveals itself to be an artificial construct of some sort. Without any kind of cultural distinctiveness, the different regions are just moods of landscape. The southeastern swamp is much like a high-definition version of Point Lookout, the glowing sea like an unbound, sprawling take on the divide from New Vegas. They're beautiful places, and excellent at creating the moods they set out to create, but they lack the impact they could have had if they had relied more on handcrafted side quests than on procedurally generated ones in what are still, basically, dungeons. It's not quite right to say that the writing in Fallout 4 is great writing, so much as it is great presentation of serviceable writing. Characters are more distinct and memorable than many in Fallout 3, and the dialogue flows better than it has before, but it's very heavy-handed much of the time. This is highlighted really well by how companions are handled within the game. Companions all have affection levels, and go through a process where they slowly explain their backstory as you go through the world. Doing things like lockpicking and hacking can increase affection as well as dialogue choices. In fact, the vast majority of them getting to know you is nodding approvingly as you collect loot. And once you've picked enough locks to impress them, they tell you a heartfelt personal anecdote. All the characters are broadly drawn and kind of cliché. The rebel leader with a heart of gold, the tough Irish brawler, the hard-boiled synth detective, the plucky newshound, and the faithful dog, of course. But the voice actors are great, and the dialogue is exceptionally snappy. James Woods is the synth detective, for instance, and he sells the role, even when the details of his backstory veer into the ridiculous. Everything in Fallout 4 exists on this level of colorful caricature. The personalities of your companions, the exaggerated mid-century designs, the self-consciously cheeky soundtrack selections. They may be broadly drawn, but they all vibrate on the same wavelength. The artifice shows through the more companions you travel with. Every single time, even if the anecdotes are different, the progression of your friendship is the same. First, you pick locks and hack turrets, and then they tell you that you're a pretty alright guy, and suppose they owe you a little background. Then you pick more locks and hack some doors, and they say, hey, there's an emotionally difficult twist on the thing that I told you last time. I'm telling you now because we've gotten so close while you've been trying to find duct tape. Then you pick even more locks and hack even more terminals, and they trust you enough to resolve their difficult secret and/or burden. And the first time it happens, it does feel kind of natural, like, we've been hanging out a while, and it makes sense that they want to have an occasional conversation. But then the second time comes around, and the next companion will very seriously say, I've seen a lot of people out here. You're different. And I'm like, I know, I have the world's largest burlap sack full of desk fans, and I want you to hold it. And then they continue to be extremely close, very good friends with you, regardless of whether or not you have done anything of substance together. Their emotional closeness to the player is just another score, like happiness and defense, food and water, hit points and radiation count. That's how it functions in many games, numerical approval scores. But making those scores partially independent of narrative progress and dialogue outside the player and the companion themselves doesn't suspend the disbelief like what you'd have in previous games. Take Fallout 2. You can travel with the overweight trader Vic, but he won't mention his estranged relationship with his daughter until the two actually cross paths in Vault City. Boone in New Vegas does not tell the player his life story whenever you max out his approval score. He asks you to help him revisit a past wrong and tells you about it on location. It feels natural. Fallout 4's companions feel incredibly artificial, even though their characterizations, in the voice acting and their personalities, are positively sparkling by Bethesda standards. Another problem with how the companions deliver their exposition is how it happens in real time. Previous games paused the action during conversations so that you could finish them in peace. Not so in Fallout 4. Your companions sometimes decide to tell you their life story in the middle of shootouts, and you can go several layers of conversation deep before getting interrupted and having to start over. I've also had conversations interrupted by other characters wandering in between, or characters getting stuck on objects in the environment and glitching out of the conversation. It is a technically frustrating reframing of the conversation mechanics, though not so frustrating as the reductive approach to player dialogue on the whole. The first two games in the Fallout franchise were such incredible role-playing titles because of the complexity of the writing, both in the NPCs and in the range of response given to the player. Fallout 3, at least, still had good, neutral, and evil. New Vegas was a major return to form, complex choices with a new transparency regarding how skills and attributes play in. Fallout 4 gives you 4 dialogue choices, only 2 of which mean anything. Yes or no. You have an enthusiastic yes, a skeptical or sarcastic yes, a no, and a request for more information. Rather than being able to ask several questions, you only ever get the one, which then advances the dialogue to the next response where you can ask another question or else respond another way. There were less than half a dozen conversations in my 97-hour playthrough where I was able to ask more than a single question at a time. And where Fallout 3 gave you a binary choice more often than not in how you solve a quest, a compassionate solution and a mercenary one, Fallout 4 more rarely gives you an option at all. Your choice is just whether or not you do the quest, the yes or no choice, not the good or evil choice. In Fallout 4, storytelling and character interaction feels like just one more function of the simulation, another minigame and not part of the game's design foundation. Fallout 4 plays just as well, functions just as coherently as if you do no quests, as if you do most of them. You'll just level slower. Charisma-based characters find themselves mostly using their powers of persuasion to get extra caps for quest rewards. Most quests in this game have 3 levels of speech challenges dedicated solely to asking for more money, and much less often for simplifying the solutions to the quest. The thing is, though, the conversations are in real time, so if you quick save in the middle of a conversation, you quick load to that exact moment. So, even though speech success is determined by a digital roll of the dice, you can roll these dice over and over and over again. It is the least satisfying dialogue of the franchise in terms of interactivity and depth of response. Less interactive by far than even Fallout 3. And again, the focus on procedurally generated radiant quests is a major part of the problem. There are some great, handcrafted side quests, like the last voyage of the USS Constitution, where you help a crew of delusional robots repair a rocket-equipped version of a sailing ship, or Human Error, where a remote trading community called Covenant uses the GOAT test from Fallout 3 as a psychological Rorschach to screen for androids, no matter how human they may seem when the torture begins. But these are serious exceptions to the rule. These quests do offer branching choices. The vast majority of quests are constructed by combining things randomly from a list of locations, activities, and enemies. Fallout 4 absolutely does value player agency, however, and in the greater experience of the game's final act, player choice really does win out, but only on the macro scale. The little consequences, the smaller ramifications of your choices, don't matter and aren't kept track of. Again, most side quests don't really offer a choice, and those that do aren't revisited in any way. NPCs that you help are reduced to a unit of population in your settlement management screen. If you fix their narrative struggles, you still have to get their food, water, defense, and happiness statistics consistently up. This is how you show you care about your communities, using the scrap economy and the settlement building interface to keep all those numbers up. If you had just one town to look after, that would be one thing. But as you get deeper into the game, it's clear that they forewent the kind of defined, charismatic fringe communities of Fallout 3, like the Republic of Dave or Andale, for blank canvas settlements onto which the minigame template can be grafted. It's a form of player choice. Whatever you build will become the actual town. The game map literally changes based on player interaction. But it is the same sort of interaction every time. Settlements are interchangeable and indistinct in the hope that the player will care enough about them to create those distinctions themselves. It's a peculiar sort of role-playing experience. You're simultaneously the general of the Minutemen, a knight of the Brotherhood, a top agent of the Railroad, and an operative of the Institute, and you micromanage the destinies of dozens of settlements. You're known across the Commonwealth, and yet you do all that without really ever defining your character in any meaningful way. The voiced responses allow the game to abbreviate your choices on the dialogue wheel to just 1 or 2 words, just 1 or 2 player inputs, yes or no, and the player character's voice actor takes up the slack and lets the dialogue progress. But the player character is never more than a vague idea, the leader of everything, and only in the game's last hours does it require any kind of absolute decision where one path would contradict another. It's a very Bethesda move. In Oblivion or Skyrim, factions were mostly non-competitive. You would eventually lead the Fighters Guild, and the Mages College, and the Thieves Underground, and that was the way of it. Bethesda has never embraced the idea that a character should not be able to do everything in a game based on build. But that saps the significance of having builds at all. In fact, Fallout 4 scraps the vast majority of the RPG mechanics that the series has been using. Skills are out. Perks, as they had been used, are out. the individual significance of attributes has been scaled back. Instead, each attribute has a list of 10 abilities. The number of that attribute will unlock abilities up to that number on the list. If you only have 3 luck, you can choose the first 3 abilities off the luck tree. You can choose any ability anytime if you have the attribute. At least, that's the back of the box. Each ability also has ranks, and those ranks unlock at level thresholds. So, sure, you can take the gun nut ability and modify weapons from level 2, but you won't be able to upgrade that ability fully and use all the upgrades until level 39. In this way, you have different builds, but the efficiency of those builds is strung out and standardized over time. Even though no 2 players will choose the same abilities in the same order, or at least are not likely to, the chances are high that by the endgame, most players will have similar characters and have played the majority of the quests the same way. It is role-playing in that you have a role and have agency, but it is not a role that the player is able to define uniquely, either mechanically or narratively. You do have to eventually choose between the factions, though, and that's one of the areas where Fallout 4 really shines. This version of the Brotherhood of Steel is much closer to the series' original vision of them, as opposed to the goody-two-shoes you see in Fallout 3. Here, they're zealous about technological control to the point of extremism, and they're portrayed as being dangerous and strange. The Brotherhood is an occupying force in Fallout 4, taking the Enclave's place in the unexpected invasion from the air story beat. They make much more sense than the Enclave, and the game is very upfront about their presence in Boston being a true crusade against the Institute, against anyone who they perceive as monsters. The Railroad are a little more cliché, a collection of likable riffraff trying to save synths from their life of servitude to the Institute. They're pretty much like you'd expect, going off of Fallout 3's replicated Man quest. And the Minutemen are the generic good guy faction this time around, trying to help the whole wasteland get on its feet. They're the faction whose influence you expand by playing the settlement building and management minigame. They have some great quests, though, like retaking their old stockpile at Fort Independence, which has gone from fort to historical site to fort again, thanks to the nuclear apocalypse. And then there's the Institute. If Fallout 4 did anything right, it's this. The Institute is a really great idea, executed well. And when people say that the plot is good, this is a lot of what they're referring to. You don't get there until late in the game, although it ought to be earlier. The whole plot, up to that point, is about finding Sean, your kidnapped son. You know the Institute took him, but you don't know why. So you go all over the entire Commonwealth finding clues, making allies, and building an enormous device in one of your settlements to break in and rescue him. It seems like the final mission of the game. It actually marks the end of the second act, with the potential of the final third act to be much longer and more meaningful than what came before. You see, Sean, your son, is an old man, and he runs the Institute. He asks for your help, welcomes you as a colleague. He hopes that you'll give the Institute a chance and see the good that it's doing. This is a phenomenal narrative shift. It reframes all the other organizations' goals and their negative interpretations of the Institute's inscrutable endeavors against what you see for yourself. Now that you've found Sean, can you really see him as a villain? It's well done. Really well done, actually, and accomplished without being overwrought. But if you've been playing the game for close to 70 hours before doing that quest, like I did, it makes the game incredibly top-heavy in terms of meaningful content. I had the vast majority of the map discovered by then, and all of a sudden I have dozens of new quests for all 4 factions, instead of a clear path to the climax. Again, this would be great if I hadn't already played the vast majority of the game world. All these new quests had me repeating dungeons that I'd already cleared maybe half the time, taking me to fast travel points I'd already discovered in other cases. I had jumped the gun, and my sense of wonder in the exploration was getting close to being tapped out right when the game's plot, the really good part where there's a sense of weight to what you're doing, was spooling up. My desire to save the climax for the last thing after the side content ended up preempting and making redundant a huge portion of the side content. I tried to play Fallout 4 like I played Fallout 3. Very rarely did that approach yield the best results. And you shouldn't play the factions like New Vegas either, where you pick a side and explore their conflicts across the whole landscape. Progressing the plot here is very dependent on doing quests for all 4 factions, and returning to their faction headquarters on a pretty consistent basis. Only when one faction declares that another must be destroyed are you expected to choose. Until then, it's less like New Vegas and more like, well, a little like Oblivion with guns. That is such a dusty old meme, but Fallout 4 wears it better than Fallout 3 ever did. The map is closer to Oblivion than to Skyrim, smaller, less reliant on physical barriers, with environments that transition from one region to the next abruptly more often than smoothly. Fewer side quests in the rural areas themselves than either Fallout 3 or Skyrim. A focus on reputation among faction organizations where you meet an ensemble of members and then climb over them on your way to leading the organizations. The content is better curated than in Oblivion. Fewer pointless template dungeons, certainly. But there's a feeling of frivolousness running throughout Fallout 4 in a way that I did experience with Oblivion, but not with Skyrim and not with Fallout 3. The gunplay is better than Fallout 3 by a mile, and it's pretty safe to say that combat in general is more visceral, responsive, and well-paced in Fallout 4 than any other Bethesda game. There are no more excessive bullet sponge enemies like Fallout 3, especially the enemies added by the Broken Steel DLC. While some enemies are higher level and take a while to whittle down, the rhythm of combat is consistently much faster, less stat-based, and plays like a straightforward FPS without an auto-loot feature. There have been many interviews and articles about how the MMO FPS Destiny influenced the mechanics of Fallout 4 in many ways, like the awkward and complicated upgrade system where pistols and rifles can be made from the same base frame, and different ammunition types and rates of fire can be swapped in and out. In my experience, the upgrade system was pointless until after level 30. Enemies always dropped weapons better than I could make, locked out from the top of the upgrade tree by level requirements I hadn't met. And the amount of junk needed to upgrade a single weapon from a basic version to a fully customized one is huge. Junk has always been a big part of Fallout. The original had many junk items, useful mainly for their flavor text. Pick up a box of instant mac and cheese, get a quip about how this kind of food is totally incomprehensible to your raised-in-the-vault character. Fallout 3 and New Vegas used junk decoratively, with some limited utility if you have the junk cannon or if you enjoyed crafting. Fallout 4 makes them one of the actual foundations of the game experience, more important than dialogue by a considerable margin. Junk fuels upgrades. Junk builds your settlements. Junk repairs your power armor. Junk allows the plot to progress by requiring you to use the workshop menu. In Fallout 3, you'd pick up as many weapons as you could, then scrapped some for repairs and sold the rest. Now, you scrap them all for parts. Parts that allow you to bypass the shops entirely. Barter is pretty much completely optional in Fallout 4. The scrap economy is used to do everything. Upgrade and improve your whole inventory. So the things that used to be obviously important, armor, cigarettes, weapons, are not half as important as 4 old typewriters and 24 coffee cups, which you scrap for screws, ceramic, and other tiny components. The game is about exploration and discovery, mostly so that you can acquire more and more of these components, of which you will use thousands over the course of an extensive playthrough. It slows the game down considerably. I spent 8 levels investing solely in strength upgrades to improve my inventory capacity. Expanding the importance of scavenging is a great idea, but its execution becomes so critical to the entire rhythm of play that it's kind of frustrating. It makes petty junk equally as important as things of obvious value. This is true 2 ways. I can't sort out what is truly valuable in my inventory, and I can't sort out what is truly valuable in my quest log. Why explore? Is it the thrill of discovery, or is it more your infinite hunger for wonder glue? Slowly, over the course of 100 hours, the latter supplants the former. Let's take a look at how Fallout 4 uses 2 of the most significant pieces of franchise iconography, vaults and power armor. One is a narrative and world design feature, the vaults. The other is a mechanical feature, the power armor. Vaults are a wonderfully Fallout idea. Each vault is not only a Fallout shelter in its basic sense, each is a social science experiment, unique from all the others, usually with a twist that proves fatal. Vault 13 in the first game had a water chip that was designed to fail. Your character's journey in ultimate exile was an event and an experiment set in motion before the war itself. In Fallout 2, Vault 8 has rooms full of crates with nothing but water chips instead of more valuable supplies. Fallout 3 got incredibly creative with how it handled the vaults, and they were the most memorable of all the large dungeons in the game. Frequently, their environmental storytelling was the best you could find, and that's for both Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. Take New Vegas' Vault 11. It's an ethics experiment in which an overseer is elected every year, and then that overseer must sacrifice themselves for what is supposed to be the safety of the vault. In reality, once the vault refused to elect an overseer, refused to send someone to their deaths, the vault's program would congratulate them on their integrity and humanity and open the door. by the time that this was discovered, almost everyone was dead, and the guilt of it was overpowering. Or how about the bizarre, outrageous Vault 108 in Fallout 3, inhabited by the mad clones of one poor vault dweller, the infamous Gary? Or how about, also from Fallout 3, Vault 92, where some of the greatest musicians of the nation were driven to homicidal madness by an endless high-frequency whine? Entering into a vault feels like an episode of The Twilight Zone, a morbid kind of puzzle. How did these vaults fail, and why? Vaults in previous games were huge, especially in Fallout 3 and New Vegas. While there are architectural similarities between vaults in Fallout 3 and 4, the ones in 4 are much smaller, closer to the ones in Fallout 1 and 2. And their stories are much simpler. Vault 111, freeze everybody. Vault 95, put a bunch of addicts in a sealed environment with a bunch of drugs. Vault 81, do mean medical experiments, unless you decide not to. Vault 114, make the rich feel inconvenienced. There's just one vault in Fallout 4 that really feels like a classic Fallout vault in terms of scale and environmental storytelling. Vault 75, underneath Malden Middle School. As children entered the vault, they were separated from their families. Then their families were killed, and the children were used in an artificial genetic selection experiment, trying to create the one true American boy over generations of selection by the overseer and staff. A children's rebellion ended the experiment and caused the vault to fail. It's a magnificently creepy location, and the way the story is slowly doled out as the children's dormitories give way to blood-soaked test chambers is very effective. It's so masterfully done as a bit of environmental storytelling, and almost all the vaults in Fallout 3 and New Vegas had similarly eerie and well-developed stories, that you wonder why they didn't go for more than just one. For the majority of Fallout 4, what do you get? Vault 111 is a brief pit stop for the main plot, tiny in scale. Vault 114 is just a shootout with mobsters while you're looking for Nick Valentine. And Vault 95 is a shootout between the Gunners and the Brotherhood of Steel, with some good loot at the bottom of the vault. It's as if, with Fallout 4, they knew that vaults were a key part of the Fallout experiment, so the vaults went in, but without the exuberantly creative approach that the franchise had previously taken. In almost 100 hours of play, less than 45 minutes of the game was quality, memorable vault diving. Fallout 4 has times when its iconic elements are used cleverly, but those times are depressingly infrequent in the franchise's traditional world-building. When it comes to a mechanical gameplay device and not a thematic one, Fallout 4 demonstrates a lot more obvious care and consideration. Power armor has been with the series from the get-go. Fallout 4 has got the same armor on the cover as Fallout 1 and 3, but it's used in a completely different way, one that works better with the new directions that the game is taking. Instead of saving power armor for the end of the game, Fallout 4 gives it to you right away, within the first couple hours. I was furious about this at first. What the hell was this? What kind of point is there in any other armor when you have this giant metal shell to protect you? Right away. Well, I was mistaken. It's true that power armor's placement at the beginning of the game instead of towards the end is demonstrative of Fallout 4's whole approach to Fallout iconography. Do it obviously, make sure it's right up front. But unlike the vaults, power armor has nearly every detail of design contributing to the long-term rhythms of the game. Power armor breaks, it runs out of power, it's expensive in terms of in-game resources to use, and it's cumbersome. You have to take it off a lot to use terminals, and the HUD takes up double the screen space of wandering normally. The whole suit feels powerful, heavy, and deeply physical. The sound effects of the boots, the hydraulic hisses and whines, how your character has to pop it open and climb in and out, although it's placed so much differently in the rhythm of the game, your connection to it is actually much deeper and more dynamic than in previous games. It's not just the best armor, it's a mobile war platform. By the end of the game, I was using it for most everything anyway, like in previous titles. The shooting mechanics are faster and more brutal than ever before. Power armor lets you handle that in a way that feels more physical and impressive than in previous implementations. Then there's its utility as a hazard suit. The glowing sea is one of the most beautiful areas in the game, and one of the most classically Fallout parts of it. Deep piles of radioactive rubble, glowing pools of sickly water, occasional points of interest jutting up through the haze. It's like the glow and the divide wrapped in one, neatly tied up in Fallout 3's classic exploration mechanics. Quite literally, the best of both worlds from an environmental design perspective. I accidentally wandered into it without power armor the first time, and I was close to death most of the journey. Your suit has a utility more like a vehicle than traditional armor, and that remove, viewing this devastation from behind the faceplate of a centuries-old war machine, is such a genuinely unique experience. It's an example of Fallout 4 really living up to its potential, and the game has plenty of examples of truly great Fallout moments, from landscapes to faction choice. The overall impression, though, is a lot less unique and memorable compared to previous titles. What makes a Fallout game? Is it just the mood, or is it in the details of the world building? If you're focusing on the mood of Fallout, Fallout 4 is well worth your time, regardless of failures in other areas. If you're coming from the values of the first two games, though, there's one thing that seals the deal on Fallout 4's problematic movement away from its roots. There are no ending slides. There are 4 endings based on faction choice, like how Fallout 3 had 3 different endings based on morality score. But the heart of Fallout, to me, has always been in how the ending articulated the consequences of so many of your smaller choices. There were ending slides of a sort in Fallout 3, depending on particular quest solutions, but the smaller ramifications of your journey weren't expanded on. New Vegas was such a tremendous return to form that I just assumed that Fallout 4 would follow suit. Dozens, if not hundreds, of decisions in your New Vegas playthrough, from companion quests to disputes between rural settlements to offbeat side stories, were covered in exhaustive detail by the ending slides. That's the thing about Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas. All those different solutions to a quest wasn't just about content in its generic advertorial sense. They were all an expression of the unique narrative role-playing that the games offered. The epilogues gave everything you did weight. You did quests with an expectation that you would receive closure on them in the slides. Not all the quests, but quite a few, enough to paint an accurate picture of who your character was and what they wanted from the world, what they got out of the world. In Fallout 3, quest solutions boiled down to the binary and a half morality system. Good, evil, and give me my caps. So it made sense that the ending slides only really addressed the general paths and not the specific details. That's Fallout 3's deal. Fallout 4 goes even farther in the direction away from New Vegas' approach. The only thing that the ending cinematic gives closure to is the opening cinematic, and it is tremendously frustrating. So, yes, your faction choice and the moral ramifications of your faction choice, one of 4, is addressed. But what's mostly being wrapped up is the nostalgia. A lot of talk about the gone-away world and how hard it is to let that go and build something new, but gosh darn it, the Vault Dweller did a pretty good job, don't you think? Fallout 4's voiced player character, although you have yes or no choices and a minor degree of tonal control over the dialogue, is not ever the player's own creation. The player character has their own arc, whether the player relates to it or not, and that arc is about nostalgia for the family and the civilization that was taken from them. So when the game ends and the cinematic comes around, only one choice matters: faction choice. Not even any kind of modifying factor for morality. Your morality is supposed to be reflected in the faction choice. The ending cinematic caps off a sentimental theme that the player probably hadn't related to for dozens of hours, if ever. It is completely unmoored from what the player actually accomplished in their playthrough. Of course, the game continues after the climax. The epilogue never ends as you continue to do quests and locations that you missed, as well as an infinite supply of Radiant quests. You can play and level and live within the wasteland simulation of Fallout 4 endlessly. That isn't the Fallout I know. Fallout needs to have a definitive end, so that the patchwork of your decisions can be examined as a whole. Even Fallout 3 capped off its epilogue eventually with Broken Steel. That's the real legacy of Fallout as a role-playing game to me. That doesn't mean that a game without traditional Fallout design features can't be part of the Fallout brand. Fallout Tactics is instantly recognizable as a Fallout title despite its peculiarities, but even Fallout Tactics has ending slides and a range of endings. It's clear that Fallout 4's conception of what's meaningful about Fallout is more a part of Bethesda's exploration of new gameplay rhythms than a modernization of the franchise's traditional elements. Fallout 4 is a wonderful game, and a real technical achievement for Bethesda. It succeeds in all its ambitions, but all its ambitions are in the direction of the game being a responsive, recognizable, open-world action title. They seem to have taken more than just customizable weapons from Destiny. They've also taken the idea that a good game is one that encourages faithful repetition, an enjoyable and addictive gameplay loop. Fallout 4 has that, and to get that, they sacrificed more than I'm comfortable with. Thanks for watching. This video and all the other videos I do are crowdfunded through the website Patreon. Viewers and subscribers contribute money to make it possible for me to make these. I'd like to thank by name people who are currently donating $10 a month or over. People like Dylan Sibley, Rob Clark, Alexander Heavens, D, Carl Gleason, Yuri Petnis, Todd Martin, Paul Cocker, Warren, Cameron Jackson, David Fry, David Reed, Boris Nielsen, Michael Atwell,
Alexander Leister, Trolls Katzberg Sigbert, I Cannot Fly, Philip Matheron, Eugene Watson, Wesley M., Aaron Albach, Beatree, Noah Duggins, Martin Karsten, Galak, Brett Gialmo, Morton Sconning, Finn Spencer, Lars Ingvar Anderson, Colin, Brad Carr, Ivan Marinov, Josh Farks, Aiden AK-47, Dewey, Annex of Rhodes, Niels Bach-Frummer, Spyro Sedaris, Matthew Lagden, Cameron, Tizar Vicarian, Connor Biblo, Brad Wallace, Ryan Gunst, Preston Allen, Sigmund Copperwood, Stephen Lark, Amir Aguilar, Jeffrey Knutson, Pontus Pfaffenstiel, Chris Larkey, Kimmo Heikkinen, Joe Wolf, Sangustin, Oliver Handlikin, Sill, Jonathan Fleichener, Harley McAvoy, Joshua VV, Josh, David Gilbreth, Sergio, Dan Reeder, Irvin, Jump Kick Punch, Andreas Larson, Matthew Zender, Bradley Smith, White Zero, Tim Marsh, Jared Meyer, Andrew Steele, Igor Babiuk, Niles D. McDonald, Seth Downing, Justin Hughes, Kumarin Vajayan, Nobody, Dennis Clark, Matthew Reed, Nick Cole Hamilton, Kevin DeBolt, Andrew Foltz, Jake Brennan, Ken Young, Dalton Seiler, Balder Carlson, Pat Hay, Soeb Sheik, Ron Gervais, Christian Zacharianson, Comfy Hat, and Cassie. I really appreciate all the support from these people and for everyone else who contributes to my Patreon. Without you, these videos wouldn't be possible. Thanks much, Lee.